On this episode of the DTVC Extra podcast, we're going to be looking at the new Spider-Man Brand New Day film, which I just saw yesterday. My senior citizen matinee, you can call it, right? My 9:30 in the morning matinee. Chris the Braid at Bulletproof calls it my senior citizen matinee. But I will say, very interesting. When we stuck in on this movie, it was pretty packed for a 9:30 a.m. Saturday matinee. I've never seen a Saturday matinee, my Saturday morning matinee, that crowded before for a film. So, we'll get into that in a second. So we'll talk about Spider-Man Brand New Day, and then in the second segment, I will talk about my novel Don's House in the Mountains. So kind of continue that series of me talking about my different books during these DTVC extras as well. But before we get, not before we get stuck in on Spider-Man Brand New Day, but more like to kind of set the stage, because that's kind of what we do here, right? When I talk about these movies, I like to kind of put them in context, right? Set the stage for what we're going to be discussing here. And Spider-Man Brand New Day is an interesting one because this was supposed to be, 2026 was the get-right year for Disney and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. After sort of the disaster that was the Marvels in 2023, and Bob Iger kind of takes Kevin Feige aside and says, it's time for an agonizing reappraisal of the situation, right? And they're going to start culling the number of projects that they got. They're going to make things less integrated or connected, and they're going to kind of focus on some more high quality things. And of course, the next year, 2024, they only put out that one movie, Deadpool and Wolverine, and it does great. It's one of the, we would have said one of the highest non-Avengers MCU movies of all time. I think we're going to have to change that to highest non-Avengers / non-Spider-Man movies of all time, because we've now got a second Spider-Man movie that is eclipsing Avengers movies, which, Spider-Man's the only one to have gates that eclipse any of the Avengers movies. So we're in uncharted territory with this second Spider-Man movie. But anyway, I think before we get into 2023, because 2023 is the one that everybody points to. They talk about, they use these terms like Barbenheimer or superhero fatigue to try to explain what was happening in 2023. But I think a big piece of the cinematic, sort of the success or failure of movies has a lot to do with momentum and how momentum is built and how it's sort of continued and furthered. We talk about this a lot in 2018 going into 2019, that period of time between the two Avengers Infinity War Endgame movies, that you had all these massive successes for comic book movies. And I think, again, it was this momentum that was generated. I think, obviously Avengers Infinity War, but even like Black Panther going into Infinity War, and then that year in between those two movies where you've got like a Captain Marvel movie that's doing over $1 billion, you've got an Aquaman that's doing over $1 billion, Venom that does like $850 million. I think that Deadpool 2 that comes out at that time would have done better if it had come out a little bit further after Infinity War, but instead it comes out like a matter of weeks after Infinity War comes out, and so it kind of was hampered a bit by that. I mean, even you've got an Ant-Man and Wasp movie that's like making over $600 million. So it's like you had this momentum generated here, and to some extent, right, that momentum gets completely halted with the pandemic in 2020. I think from Marvel's standpoint, though, they never felt like the momentum was halted because they're putting out stuff on Disney Plus that I don't think they saw that as halting their momentum or doing anything to diminish their momentum. I think they felt like they were continuing the momentum by having these successes on Disney Plus. And, you get their first setback with the Eternals at the end of 2021, but then they come back big with Spider-Man No Way Home. And that's sort of like the cinematic event that gets everybody back to the theater, I think. There is some thought to that maybe it's Top Gun Maverick the next year, but Top Gun Maverick only does about $500 million less than Spider-Man No Way Home. I feel like Spider-Man No Way Home was that movie. Now, I didn't do either of those films with my movie back from the pandemic. I went and saw the Joel Cohen Macbeth film with Denzel Washington, because I guess that's the kind of guy I am, right? But which is really good. That was a really great cinematic experience. That was worth checking out as my comeback to the theater after the pandemic movie. But anyway, so the next movie after Spider-Man No Way Home is Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. And I think this probably seems like a strange one for me to pick as the one that starts to slow the momentum of the MCU machine. But I think what it does, I remember when that movie came out, that there was like all this buzz in the commercials, like, oh, we've got Patrick Stewart coming back as Professor Xavier. We've got Haley Atwell doing Peggy Carter as Captain America, John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic. And it seemed like this really great thing that they were doing there. But then you watch the movie and they don't really do much with those characters. They kind of just have Scarlet Witch like just, tear them to shreds right away. Now, there were elements of that movie that were good, and I think they got people to come back. But I think there were a lot of people that looked at that movie and just said, what was the point? I mean, even Patrick Stewart said, I don't understand why they brought me back just to do this. Like, it doesn't seem to, wasn't worth it for me, really. But I'm sure they paid him a good amount. So he was like, okay, well, that's what you're going to pay me. I'll come back and do this. But so you get that kind of that start there. And that's, again, early 2022. And you've also got like the Thor Love and Thunder movie, which again does well for a Thor movie. I mean, it does almost 800 million. But it was another one where people were like, what do I make of this Thor Love and Thunder thing where you've got kids being threatened and menaced, and it's kind of doesn't know if it wants to be funny or serious, and it was kind of all over the place. And so again, people went out to see that movie because they liked Thor Ragnarok. So it gets a bump from that, but then it kind of fades a little bit. Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. I mean, that's a movie that, again, it was a top 10 earner for its year in 2022. But there were a lot of people that were kind of like, okay, I saw it. Yeah, it wasn't as good. I mean, again, the first movie does 1.3 billion, I think, something like that. I mean, again, it is, I think Deadpool and Wolverine passed it. So I think for non-Avengers, non-Spider-Man movies, I think that, that one is, I think it's after Deadpool and Wolverine now, but still, it's one of the highest grossing non-Avengers, non-Spider-Man movies that the MCU has ever done. And yes, it was going to be working uphill when it didn't have Chadwick Boseman. But I think they put a lot of money into that movie. And to put 250 million, and we've talked about this before, if you put 250 million in a movie, it should make $1 billion. That's the expectation. And of course it doesn't. And I think Black Panther is probably hurt by Doctor Strange and Thor Love and Thunder. And so then when Black Panther's kind of hurt by that and people are skipping that one or not seeing it to the same level that people were expecting, you then get the complete dud of Ant-Man and Wasp Quantumania, which again, I kind of like that one. I feel like it's Billy Ocean's Loverboy movie set, like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Which if you haven't seen that video for Loverboy, go check that one out. It's probably on YouTube. Yeah, I would imagine it's on YouTube. But it kind of feels like that kind of energy, which I appreciated. But again, the other thing, of course, is that they're kind of giving us Kang the Conqueror, which people weren't resonating enough with him either. And so then we get the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and this is a kind of, I don't want to say this is a parallel to Spider-Man Brand New Day, but I do think that there was a sense from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or from Kevin Feige and Disney and everybody's standpoint, that this was going to be the big one for 2023 was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And if you look at it, the progression made sense. Think about Iron Man, right? The first two movies do okay, the third one does over $1 billion. Captain America, the first two do okay, third one does over $1 billion. I think Guardians of the Galaxy as a series is probably in that vein, and so the third one should have done that. And so that's why they put $250 million in it. But the other thing was there was that issue, that stuff that went down with James Gunn where they kind of had to ask him back to make this movie, and I think they let him do whatever he wanted with it. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it's my second favorite MCU movie, but the rewatchability on that is almost nil, right? I mean, who is going, it's hard to go sit through animal abuse a second time around. And you could make the case that also, I don't know that one slowed momentum the same way that the other movies did, but it kind of didn't set Marvel in a good place going into the fall with the Marvels, which is just, kind of an all-around sauteed and wrong sauce deal, which, again, I kind of like that movie. I went and saw, that was when I saw in the theater, and because Mitch, the Video Vacuum, was on the podcast here talking about it. I said, it's not a bad movie. I think you might like it. And so I went and saw it, and he was right. I did like it. But it flops miserably. Now, one of the interesting things is on Wikipedia, they list the budget for that as $375 million. And they kind of go through this like thing where there were these citations showing, no, this is what the budget was. If you look on IMDb, they list the budget at $220 million, and I think that's more accurate just in terms of how we're calculating these, because I don't think any of the other MCU movies that are listed on Wikipedia, or really any other movies that are on, or any other Marvel movies on Wikipedia, calculate the budget the way that the Marvels was calculated. I think all of them obviously cost more money to make when it comes to the advertising. That's why they say a movie's got to make 3 times its budget back. I think, again, when you get into $250 million for the budget, you got to probably make $1 billion to make it worthwhile. So that's more like 4 times the budget back. But either way, even if you're talking about $220 million, I think this is the first MCU movie to not make its budget back. And it might be the only one, I think, right? When you look at some of the other ones here, I don't know of any other MCU movie didn't make its budget back. So like even at that 220 lower estimate for the budget, that was still that bad. And I think people looked at that and said, they looked at kind of the year. And I mean, you can also turn to DC, right, for 2022 going into 2023. Now, granted, they had their own issues with how they were doing this kind of stuff, but it's kind of like, if Marvel was doing a little bit better, I think DC might have been doing a little bit better. But, DC wasn't doing Marvel any favors either. Like sometimes, if DC might have been doing some good stuff, that might have carried over and helped Marvel. But I mean, that whole decision to do a separate Black Adam movie and do it for like $260 million, I don't know where they thought they were going to get that money back on. Again, if you think about the MCU versus the DC Extended Universe, or how Warner was handling this stuff versus Kevin Feige would have said to The Rock, like, you're going to be the villain in the second Shazam movie. That's it. And he would have said, no, I want my own Black Adam movie. And they would have said, all right, go kick rocks. We'll get somebody else to play the villain in Shazam, Fury of the Gods. We'll get another Black Adam. And, that movie would have made, a ton of money. And, The Rock would have been like, oh, man, I wish I'd been a part of that, that kind of thing. But instead, DC bends over backwards, and they end up with 2 bad movies, right? Black Adam and Shazam, Fury of the Gods. The other thing, too, when you look at how Marvel handles things, they get rid of people quick. And DC did not get rid of Ezra Miller for, playing the Flash character soon enough, or at all, right? They decided, okay, we've already put so much money into this, we're just going to keep going with Ezra Miller. And that fandom was not, they weren't into Ezra Miller. They knew what they had done and didn't want to be a part of that. And I think at the same time, I think that Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, it kind of made the whole multiverse thing, like all these multiverse kind of things, feel a little, worn, like a little bit too overused. And I think people saw it as gimmicky when they saw the ads for the Flash movie. And so, of course, it tanks, right? It tanks miserably and does really badly. Again, you can go to Marvel on the other end of things, where Marvel has this bad 2023, and they come out of it with the mindset of, one, we're going to cut bait with Jonathan Majors. And I think, yes, again, I don't think DC would have stuck with Jonathan Majors, because I don't know, though. It's hard to say if they would have tried to, do a rehab kind of thing, or try to do, because again, the fact that they stuck with Ezra Miller, despite the stuff that was out there about them, it does make me wonder. But I do feel like DC probably would have cut bait with Jonathan Majors as well. But Marvel, they didn't just cut bait with him, but they looked at the whole situation and said, you know what, this Kang thing, I think they were enthralled with how Jonathan Majors played the Kang character and thought, okay, we can center the whole thing around him. But they just quickly pivoted to this Doctor Doom thing. And they'd put so much into this whole Kang thing, and it's like you're not watching movies that like for example, Ant-Man and Wasp, Quantumania, where it feels like there's like this whole thing of like, oh, we're going to do something with this Kang character. They're just done with it. They just cut it out. And I think that ability to pivot, I think we'll see, but it looks like it's already starting to pay dividends. Now, what Kevin Feige and Bob Iger decided, again, was that they were going to cut a lot of the stuff. And we didn't even talk about Disney Plus, but Disney Plus had a lot of stuff going on as well, right? With too many shows that people weren't really into, that people weren't really going for. So one of the knocks, of course, on the Marvels wasn't just that that it was characters that people weren't all that interested in, but also that it was characters that took place that were in other shows, and this idea of that you had to do homework. Now, I think that the homework thing, I think there is some truth to it, but I think there's also some, like, I don't know what the right term is, but there's some of those guys that look at those kinds of movies, like a movie with a diverse female cast, and would say they don't want to come out and say, I can't watch a movie with a diverse female cast, so they say, I didn't want to have to do homework for the movie. And we saw a lot of that on like Twitter and stuff like that, right? That there were a lot of these, I didn't want to do homework for the movie as a euphemism for, I just didn't really find this interesting, and I think there's something about Brie Larson that rubs some people the wrong way. I think she's kind of, I don't know how to explain it, because she doesn't rub me the wrong way. I'm perfectly fine. I like watching her as Captain Marvel. I think she does a good job there. But I do think that there's something about her personality where she's it's almost like, I don't know how to describe it, but especially for some guys, they don't like how she comes off. I think because she's very strong and very like pointed and direct in how she is. And I think she plays that Captain Marvel character exactly how you would want her to be played. And I think that does turn some guys off. So that was part of it with the Marvels. But I think that for me, I think a big part of it was these characters hadn't really been developed really well. But there's a sense from Marvel's, from the MCU standpoint of like, oh no, we had developed them all, right? Everybody knew Ms. Marvel from the Ms. Marvel show. Everybody knew Monica Rambeau from WandaVision. And everybody knows Captain Marvel from the Captain Marvel movie. So this is perfectly fine. We should be able to just throw them all in together and it's great. And it's like, no, they needed to be developed more first. I was trying to think of what an equivalent would be. And I think it would have been like, I don't know, like if you'd done Captain America, like if you, I'm trying to think of what the one would be, because the problem was is that I think Captain Marvel needed a second movie to kind of make her, I don't know, she needed a second movie to kind of establish her more. But the other thing is, I think there was a sense, again, from Marvel's standpoint, that I don't think they were seeing, and again, they were at a point where they had already kind of put these movies out, but they had put too many movies too close together and they weren't putting the resources behind them that they should have. And so you spend $250 million or $220 million on the Marvels, but you're also using resources to make, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And then, Paul Rudd had said that they didn't have the resources for Ant-Man at Quantumania because those resources were being used for Thor Love and Thunder or for Wakanda Forever. And so I think you get that sort of like law of diminishing returns there. But I think also Guardians of the Galaxy was supposed to be a bigger lead-in. And I think to some extent the year 2023 was supposed to be kind of the year of the superhero movie. And it ended up being this kind of dud thing. And it really ends up with a thud with the Marvels. And so, again, with this agonizing reappraisal of the situation, going to my Hunter S. Thompson, Iger and Feige decide, okay, we're going to cut some of the shows. We're going to redo some of the shows. Like, for example, Daredevil Born Again was completely redone. But we're going to sort of go with a lesser slate. Now, what happens is I think so they 2024, they end up only doing Deadpool and Wolverine, but it is a huge hit, right? It is exactly the movie that they needed at that time to sort of stem the bleeding, I guess, or slow the bleeding. But then that next year, they were kind of stuck with Captain America Brave New World, which was something that they had to gone through this whole process of reshooting. I feel like for Anthony Mackie, that movie doesn't do him justice. I think he could have used a better movie there. But then you've got the Thunderbolts, which I think, had Marvel been rolling, and I think they greenlit that movie when Marvel was really rolling, that, that would have been the kind of thing that you'd establish these new characters, and it would, I don't know how they weren't new characters, right? We'd seen them in other things before, but especially Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova. Everybody liked that character, also liked Sebastian Stan's Winter Soldier, and so I think there was a thought of like, okay, this could really build something. I think it is building something. I think people liked that movie. I think it's just people didn't go see it in the theater. And then the Fantastic Four movie, same thing. It doesn't do anywhere near what they were expecting it to do. I think it's building something, and it's almost like they had to kind of start over in that sense of like, first we got to get this Captain America Brave New World movie out and done. I think they wanted it to be in 2024, which I think would have been a little bit better if it had been in 2024 with Deadpool and Wolverine. But instead, it's got all these reshoots and everything, and it finally comes out early in that year. That's not really a good time for a movie to be coming out anyway. That early window, that January-February window, that's better for like the Jason Statham, movie, or Taken, right? Taken did well in that. I know Sean Malloy was on when we were talking about Van Damme, and he was talking about Taken being really big in that window. You don't want a Marvel movie in that window. You want your Marvel movies coming out, earliest like May or June, but really like, Spider-Man right now in August, late July, early August. That's really when you want to get those movies out. So that wasn't going to do well. But the thing was that the way that they had this whole setup was these three movies in 2025 were going to just, they'd already kind of had them ready to go, or they'd already been working on them. So let's get them out and kind of use them to build something for 2026. So that's where we get into Spider-Man Brand New Day, and they had all their eggs in that basket, and it was a question of how well was it going to do? And the year already to start with wasn't looking good for Disney and Marvel, et cetera. Now, granted, also Sony is involved with this. If you go on Wikipedia, it lists Sony as the distributor, but obviously, Disney and Marvel have a lot to do with this as well. But the Mandalorian movie doesn't do well. But then also from a comic book movie standpoint, Supergirl doesn't do well. In fact, it doesn't make its budget back, and its budget wasn't that high compared to other superhero movies. So it was looking like, sort of from a genre IP standpoint, that we were going to have a really interesting year here. But I think this is where we go back to momentum. And I think this is an interesting piece here to think about when we talk about momentum. The Odyssey, I think, plays a big part in getting us to where we are with Spider-Man Brand New Day making at this point, I think it's like 1.6 billion as we're doing this recording. What is that, 9-10 days in the theater, and it's already at 1.6 billion, which is just insane, right? Insane numbers. But this is an interesting thing, is I think in the past, when, with the movie theater, or the movie industry, when it came to going to see movies in the theater, and I'd read an article about this because, over the past however many years, right, every major entertainment magazine has done its own The Death of Cinema or The Death of the Theater Experience or whatever article. And I think around the time like Furiosa tanked in the theater or something, you had one of those articles again. But one point they made, which is one that I did think was a valid one, and that is that because a lot of times movies were being spaced out in the theater, they weren't able to gain a sort of momentum amongst each other to sort of build to the summer blockbusters. And that was something that, when I was growing up, and I think up until relatively recently, maybe even up until before the streamer era comes in, that was sort of how the industry worked, is that you would, you'd have these early movies in the year. Sometimes you'd get a breakout like a Taken or something like that, but they would kind of slowly build to the point that when you get to the summer, everybody had seen however many movies are in the theater and they were excited and jazzed to keep seeing them. It's one of those things where if you go for a really good experience to see one movie, it's almost like, oh, why don't I go to the theater more often? Let's go see something else. Or, whereas like if you see a real dud, there is almost a sense of like, yeah, do I want to go see something else? Or if you look at what's available in the theater, you're like, well, I've already seen everything, right? I mean, I think that the AMC that I went to had like 4 movies showing because Spider-Man was taking up all the screens. Spider-Man and the Odyssey were taking up all the screens. So at that point, you're just like, well, what do I need to go see in the theater? I've already seen everything, or I'll go do something else, right? And I think this is also maybe a lesson for Disney in how this works, because Disney has kind of come into the industry wanting to sort of just take it all over. They want to crush their competition. And we've talked about this before too, that they have this idea with all the IP that they own of, let's go into the theater, let's just jam up the theater with different projects. So that in a way, like a Mandalorian, if it doesn't do well, it's okay if it hurts, another studio's 1 or 2 movies that year. If it hurts one of their movies, we're okay with it. And that mindset of wanting to crush your competition is kind of anathema to what really works in the film industry. Is you don't want to be crushing your competition. You want to actually have healthy competition. It's almost like the movie industry is more like professional sports, where you need to have teams to play against, or you need to have other teams that are good to get people to want to watch. You don't want them to just watch one team. You want them to watch all the teams and really get into the sport and go see some live games or something like that. And I think the Odyssey did that for Spider-Man Brand New Day. I haven't seen the Odyssey yet. I'm probably not going to see it until it gets to the, on physical media. And then when it's in my local library, I'll probably take it out from the library and watch it at home. Just because I don't know if I've got the energy to sit through that long of a movie, especially if it doesn't have an intermission. If you're going to do a movie that long, you got to have an intermission. But anyway, I think a lot of people went to go see the Odyssey and were really big fans of it. And I think one of the things was it got people excited to go to the movies again, and excited to see movies that as somebody had termed it as movies done the hard way, essentially. And I do think that there are a lot of people, because the thing for a Spider-Man Brand New Day to pull in $1.6 billion, in the first 9 or 10 days, you need a combination of excited Spider-Man and comic book fans. And I'll tell you, when I went on Saturday, my Saturday morning matinee, I saw people with Spider-Man shirts on. Now, unless you had something really big that opening weekend, like a wedding or something to go to, Spider-Man shirt was going probably opening night to that. So that means Spider-Man shirt is already back a week later coming to see the movie again. And it's possible that Spider-Man shirt went during the middle of the week as well. This could be the third time Spider-Man shirt is back seeing the movie again. Again, we're talking about 1.6 billion in 9 or 10 days. You need repeat viewings to get there. And so you've got that element, right? The movie definitely nailed it for that element. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit when we start getting stuck in on the movie. But then you also need the casual film goer element to want to go see a movie that bad. Because that's how you get Avengers Endgame up above $2 billion. That's how you get Avatar above $2 billion. But especially like those comic movies like Avengers, you get people who are the hardcore MCU comic book fans that are going to go and see it multiple times, but also you get the casual fan or casual moviegoer who is just kind of out to go see a movie, wants to go have a nice night out or evening or whatever, and they're looking for something to watch. And I think that fan went to go see The Odyssey, was excited by The Odyssey, and said, "What's next? Oh, sweet, let's go check out Let's go check out Spider-Man Brand New Day," which also has people from The Odyssey in it, which I don't think hurt it either. So you get that combination of things. I think this is where Disney maybe, I don't know if Disney's going to learn a lesson from this, but I do feel like the momentum generated from The Odyssey, and I mean, you could talk about kind of the whole year, right? We've kind of had a whole year of that kind of thing. I mean, like for example, like Toy Story, I don't know that Toy Story generates momentum. And we see a lot with animated movies, but I don't know that generates momentum. I think that's a movie where you had a lot of millennials that took their kids to go see Toy Story 5, right? That's kind of the big thing there. But I think when you look at some like Project Hail Mary, Obsession, those kinds of movies that were kind of came out of nowhere and people went and saw them, I think that gets people back in the theater who hadn't been going to the theater as much. So they go, everybody's talking about Obsession. Let's go see Obsession. All right, fine. I'll go check out Obsession. And it's like, I've been to the movies in a while. Maybe I'll start going to some more. And I think that's where Odyssey kind of picked up the ball and really ran with it and, kind of collected all of these people that were going to see things like Project Hail Mary or Devil Wears Prada or again, Obsession, something like that, right? The Odyssey kind of collected all of them together, and boom, there we go. There's over $1 billion there. But then that same crew that was all built up through the Odyssey was like, I got to go see something next. I'm enjoying going to the theater again. This is exciting, and that's where Spider-Man Brand New Day comes in, and so I don't know that Disney's going to learn from this and say, okay, we can't keep going with this approach of trying to crush everybody. We need to sort of, instead of trying to crush everybody, let's see if we can sort of help each other. Let the Odyssey kind of raise the tide a bit, and then we can raise the tide even more and kind of go from there. I don't know if that's what Disney's going to do. I mean, the other thing that Disney likes to do is they like to crush indie theaters. And since they've bought, Fox Studios, they've really been vaulting movies so that indie theaters can't use them. And indie theaters like to use those vaulted movies, something like Say Anything, because it gets people to come to those indie theaters to see those older movies. And that was a thing, for a while, those older movies were doing better than these new movies, right? People were more likely to go, Uncle Buck's playing. I haven't seen Uncle Buck in years. Let me go see Uncle Buck on a random Tuesday night that it's playing at one of the indie theaters here in Philadelphia. And I think, again, those movies help Disney more than they hurt Disney. It's just Disney can't control those indie theaters. That's why they want to crush them. But, if somebody goes and sees Say Anything, and they see that Spider-Man's playing, again, there's this sense of like, boy, I haven't been to the theater in a year or two, but I'm going to go see Say Anything. Oh, it's great. I used to go to the theater all the time. This is kind of fun. Why don't I do this more often? What's the next thing that's showing? Oh, well, everybody's going to see the Spider-Man movie. I'll go see that. Everybody's going to see this Odyssey movie. I'll go see that. So I do think that I'm hoping that the success of this movie will cause Disney to change its tact a bit. I don't think it will. I think the other problem, of course, now is, this is why David Ellison is trying to get us to back Paramount's purchase of Warner, right? Is that he's saying, well, we can't fight Disney separately. We've got to come together if we're going to fight Disney. And I hope that maybe we start to kind of understand that, like, no, we need more studios putting out more movies, because you never know what's going to be the one that's a hit. But whatever the hit is, whether it's Obsession or, if it's the Obsession instead of The Mandalorian, yes, Disney loses money because The Mandalorian doesn't make any money, but Obsession can still have a domino effect to make Disney money later on down the road. And I think you can trace some of Obsession's success to Spider-Man Brand New Day's success. And I don't know, maybe it's a bit of a stretch here, but I think this is something, we, as a kid growing up, this was what the movie theater experience was like. Every year kind of started a new wave of films, and they would build to the summer blockbusters. Kind of, they would fade a little bit in the Halloween period. You'd get like some horror movies in the Halloween period, and then you'd build back up for Christmas, and then you'd start the whole thing over again. And I do think that model, that approach, I think we're seeing it happen this year. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if this is going to change anything, but yeah. Now I'm going to start talking here about Spider-Man Brand New Day. I can't believe I went a half hour on that other piece there, but let's get into Brand New Day here. So spoiler alert. This is your warning after a half hour of me talking about, like, kind of setting the stage here, and why I think this movie is such a big success. I'm going to start getting in on it now, so just be warned. I don't want to spoil this movie for anybody, because me going into it completely cold, the only thing I knew going into this movie was that Frank Castle was going to play the Punisher, that you were going to have the Incredible Hulk in it, that it looked like the Hand, right, was in some of the commercials, and that, Michael Mando was going to play Scorpion. That was pretty much all I knew going into this movie, and that, I think, really helped me, the fact that I had no clue about anything else that they were going to do with this film. And so I want, if you haven't seen this movie yet, and if you haven't heard anything about it, I want you to go in clean. So stop right here. Just cut this right here. Go see the movie as soon as you can, then come back here and listen to my thoughts on it and see if my thoughts align with yours. But yes, I want you to I don't want you to want it to be spoiled for you. Now, I also have a sense that I'm probably one of the last people to see this movie, but I will say, when I went to log this on Letterboxd, there were definitely some people that I follow, that I'm friends with, that they had the little clock sign next to it saying "want to watch," right? So I know there's some of you out there that haven't seen it yet, so just please stop this now, come back in a bit. But anyway, so Spider-Man Brand New Day, I really love this movie. It was kind of perfect for comic book geeks like myself. It kind of had the right amount of geekiness in there. I noticed, like, from the critics' standpoint, it seems like for the most part, critics were high on this one. One of them said that the ancillary characters took away from Spider-Man's story. I don't know that I agree with that, because it just felt like the whole thing was Spider-Man. Like, he was in every scene, he was a part of everything. This is a more mature Tom Holland version of Spider-Man, which I could appreciate, and he had talked about how he didn't want to be in his 30s doing Spider-Man, which I get. The funny thing is, for me as a fan of Spider-Man, I came into Spider-Man in the late 80s. And at that point, Spider-Man was in his 30s then. He was married to Mary Jane at that point. There'd be like annuals or, giant size episode, comic book issues where he would talk with her about, his powers and stuff, because she had never really talked about it before or whatever. But he was an adult at that point. So that's kind of the Spider-Man that I understood, and then I would watch these movie versions of it where they'd start him in high school every time. And it was kind of having to start over in a sense. But that's not the Spider-Man that I knew. I mean, it wasn't long into me collecting. I think I started like in 88, 89. So by 91, right, that was his 30th anniversary. And I remember that was expensive. That was kind of when I was starting to get priced out. So Spider-Man had 4 books at that time, and each one had some kind of like expensive hologram cover to celebrate his 30th anniversary. I think each one of those was $4 a piece, which doesn't sound like a lot now, because I think that's the average price of a comic is like $4 or $5 for a comic. But back then it was like, like $10 allowance, and most of the comics at that time were $1.25. So that was in the $1.25 era. So if you think about that, $4 for a hologram cover, that's more than 3 regular priced comics, right? It's almost 4 regular priced comics. So that was expensive, and that's kind of partly how I got priced out. But that's the Spider-Man that I knew. So I understand Tom Holland if he says, like, I kind of feel like I shouldn't be playing him in my 30s, but I like this version of Spider-Man. I like this, like, kind of this maturing, in his mid-20s Spider-Man here. So the basic premise, I don't know if I'm going to get into the story because I'm hoping you've already seen it, so maybe I don't need to give a synopsis since we're already here. I'll just talk about what I liked about it. So again, I like that Tom Holland's aspect of it. The Punisher, John Bernthal as the Punisher was fantastic. I think they mitigated really well him being Frank Castle, who's usually, John Bernthal as Punisher. Frank Castle is usually an R-rated Punisher. But the thing is that, yes, he's an R-rated Punisher, but he's also a dad, right? Or, and I think he still has a kind of a, maybe not a fatherly feeling towards Spider-Man, but at least an avuncular kind of sensibility towards him. And I think, normally, like, he swears a lot in the other things, but, obviously in PG-13, he can't swear a lot. But it actually kind of felt organic that, him as a dad and having a sort of avuncular feeling towards Spider-Man, that he would kind of tone it down a little bit, that he wouldn't be quite so like the language wouldn't be quite there. So it was another really great performance by Bernthal. I definitely dug that. I always love Mark Ruffalo. He's always a lot of fun as the Hulk, and I appreciated that. And then the big reveal, right? So I'm trying to figure out who this villain is. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with this villain in the movie. So, again, we know the villain is someone who can mentally jump into other people's brains and control them and tell them what to do. And I was trying to figure out what's going on here. So they start showing this person in a hood. And I thought, And as they're kind of showing a little bit of the silhouette face, I was like, oh, it kind of looks like Madam Web. Are we doing Madam Web here? That sounds crazy. And then, he does some facial recognition stuff. He's like, oh, this person's name is Jean Grey. And I was like, oh, yes. How awesome is that? Now, the thing is, of course, is this is a very formulaic Marvel movie storyline in terms of the way it works. And I think this might be why some people didn't like the movie, and I can definitely get behind that. I understand feeling that way. I think for me as the comic book geek, I like the formulaic story worked for me because it was formulaic in the ways that I would have wanted as a comic book geek. But it's like, so first off, when he goes to that office of damage control and he meets that guy there, what was his name? Metzger, I think was the character name. He meets Metzger, played by Trammell Tillman. And Metzger's a jerk-off, right? You know right away that this guy's going to be a total jerk-off. I mean, when have we ever watched a movie with a character, especially an MCU movie, with a character who's part of the government, like that kind of thing, who isn't a jerk-off? They're all jerk-offs. So this guy's a jerk-off, and you're just like waiting for it to happen. When is the jerk-off part going to happen? And then when it's revealed that our quote-unquote baddie is Jean Grey, it's like, oh, so Spider-Man is going to help them catch Jean Grey because he doesn't know this guy's a jerk-off yet. And it's like, I don't want them to go through this. I don't want this part to happen. But like once you can already see how the story unfolds, because how Marvel movies work from, that's sort of the way the three acts play out, right? That this one's going to play out exactly the way any of the other ones play out, especially once you figure out, once they tell us that it's Jean Grey. But they use that element of him being, duped by this Metzger character and helping them capture her to kind of fully flesh out her powers, right? So she goes from just being telepathic to, having telekinetic powers, and all, kind of being the all-powerful kind of character that she is. Now, I was reading about this a little bit, that they said there wasn't an impetus to get Jean Grey in the movie. They were kind of trying to figure out who they wanted the baddie to be, and it just sort of came to them organically that it would be Jean Grey. I think either way, whether this was, an idea of like, hey, we're going to start introducing mutants and you've got to have a mutant in this movie, or it just happened organically and they're like, let's look at the characters we've got to use here. Oh, this could actually work if we have Jean Grey play the character. Either way, I mean, this is something I've been clamoring for in other episodes that I've talked about Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, right? I talked about how Brave New World should have had maybe Wolverine or somebody like that in it. That, Wakanda Forever, I think Freddie and I talked about this, that they should have had Storm in Wakanda Forever. So we've been wanting them to insert mutants into these movies already. And so to do it this way, I thought was perfect, especially to do it in the Spider-Man movie. So, I mean, if you're a comic book geek, you have to love that. They also gave red meat to Spider-Man geeks by throwing more of his rogues gallery in at the beginning, right? You have like Tombstone and who else was in there? Tarantula, they mentioned Shocker, that kind of thing, right? You got to throw us geeks the red meat like that. And they definitely did that. For me, this was really, really a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed this. I was trying to think where I put it for my Marvel movies all time, and I have it pretty high just because I really liked how all of this worked. I think I might put it above Deadpool and Wolverine as my fourth highest, but I've got to kind of, it's definitely not. So my top three are Captain America, Winter Soldier, and then Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and then Black Panther is my third. So I don't think this was better than any of those for me. I didn't enjoy I didn't enjoy this more than any of those. But I think Deadpool and Wolverine, I don't know. I'm always a sucker for Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man. He's always been one of my favorite comic book characters. And I think they took some big swings here, and they worked. I think Tom Holland, in working on this fourth movie, I do think there was a lot of fan service. I think he thought about what fans would want from this kind of movie. I know, Freddie and I had talked about this on an episode last year when they were kind of coming up with what they want, or maybe it was a couple of years ago when they were talking about what they wanted this movie to be. And there was a sense that Sony wanted this to be kind of this big intergalactic kind of thing with Null, the god that created all the Venom symbiotes, and kind of merge Venom in with this world, and they wanted to kind of put all that together. And whereas Marvel was thinking, no, we need more of a we need to bring Spider-Man back to the street level. That's where we want him, and bring in Punisher. I think they talk about maybe Daredevil, but definitely Punisher. And there was a little bit of friction between Sony and Marvel about what they wanted to do here, and somehow I guess Sony must have come around. I think Tom Holland had something to do with that. I think also Zendaya. They both were wanting more of this kind of street level Spider-Man, and I think it worked so perfectly. I think this was exactly what we would want from Spider-Man. Now, interesting thing, the previous episode of the DTVC Extra, I was crushing Daredevil Brand New Day, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, the way this movie comes across with Daredevil Brand New Day. I think the mayor is the same as the end of Brand New Day, the one who takes over for Kingpin. But I was reading on Wikipedia that when they were making Born Again, they were trying to keep in contact with the people who were making Brand New Day to kind of make it like the two sort of flow together, or the two to work in concert. But I don't really see how Spider-Man fits in Born Again, because it seems like he's been saving the city for months, or for years rather. Essentially the whole time that Zendaya and Ned, I can't remember that actor's name, but they're the whole time that they're in. At MIT, he's saving the world for the past 4 years. So what was he doing while Kingpin was destroying New York City, right? Wouldn't he have been bouncing around in his webs, taking out the anti-vigilante task force? And I also don't remember us even having Spider-Man mentioned on Born Again, right? Which, I mean, Spider-Man is so popular in this movie. Like, everybody loves him. They think he's the greatest. Well, if everybody loves Spider-Man, I don't know. It didn't make a lot of sense, and so I couldn't really put the two together, that they were together in the same world. And I think if you were going to go with one version or the other, I like this better. This works better than what was going on in Born Again, at least for me. I don't really know how those two fit. This made more sense to me. I'm excited to kind of see what's going to happen at the end of the year with Avengers Doomsday, but this was the win that the MCU needed. They were putting all their eggs in this basket. They were kind of bringing things back down to sort of their core things that work well. I mean, you remember, I think it was the end of 2023, after that disaster with the Marvels, that they announced, we're bringing Robert Downey Jr. back. He's going to play Doctor Doom, and we're going to do this Spider-Man movie. And it was kind of this sense of like, we're going to come back to what works for us. This movie needed to hit it out of the park. Now, I don't know that it needed to be this successful, where it's like breaking records. And I mean, the fact that it's already at $1.6 billion, I mean, are we talking like the 2 billions, right? I mean, at this point, that's in play, right? I mean, there's people that are going to go see this again. I don't know how many people when I was at the theater were seeing it for the first time, but yeah, I think we're going to see more people that are going to be going multiple times to see this. I mean, I don't know that I could go see it again. I kind of, one time in the theater is enough for me. I do think I'm going to rewatch Deadpool and Wolverine and kind of see maybe where I put that with this movie. See if maybe those two, if I like this one better than that one. But yeah, I mean, again, as a geek, as a comic book geek like me, and I call myself a comic book geek, even though I kind of stopped collecting in the early '90s when I got priced out. But then also I came back like in the early 2000s, and I left it. But even with these movies, I didn't really get into doing the MCU movies until I saw the Marvels, and I was like, hey, this isn't that bad, and it's like considered one of the worst of their movies. And then I started doing, I think I did MCU Phase 1 as a DTVC Extra series, and that kind of got me into watching them. And of course, they're all on Disney Plus, so I can just go and watch them all. So that was kind of another thing. I think it kind of played into my comic book collecting sensibilities, and that's kind of gotten me into them. And now, of course, I'm caught up. I've seen them all at this point. But from that comic book geek standpoint, it's like, okay, how are they going to bring the X-Men into this? And to have Jean Grey be the baddie, not baddie kind of thing. Was absolutely beautiful. For me, it really played on my geeky sensibilities. And then, of course, you get the Hulk, right? And the Hulk is smashing through things, and the Punisher's shooting at the Hulk, and, Spider-Man's trying to dodge the Hulk, and it's such a beautiful thing. And then in the hand, you've got the hand there, and you get some really nice visuals with the hand, and Spider-Man having to fight them, too. It was just all really, really great stuff. But then also, there's some moments in there, too, before I wrap this up, that I should touch on, too, because I think, I talked about how I think I've talked about that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is probably the only MCU movie that actually kind of was that emotional for me, that actually was crying at certain points in it. I think because again, animals. What do animals are always going to get me, right? It's always going to be a sad thing for me. But no other movie has really kind of got me that close to it. But I think the scene in Brand New Day where Jean Grey is it's towards the end of the movie, and she's about to try to kill that Metzger guy, and Tom Holland's like, no, don't do, you this isn't you shouldn't do this. And she's like, listen, we're different, kind of, nobody likes us, we're separate from the world, this kind of thing. And she says something about going inside his brain, because throughout the movie, right, she's not been able to go in his brain. And finally he says, just come in go ahead, you can get my brain, I'm happy to have you jump into my brain. And she does. And essentially, she replaces Tom Holland in that really touching moment that he has with Aunt May, where she's talking about his powers and all of this stuff. And I just, that was a really touching moment. I didn't full-on cry like I did with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And I have no shame at this point. I'm 47 years old, so I'm not really, concerned about how I look if a movie makes me cry or not. Not every movie's gonna be terms of endearment, which I always kind of list that one out as that scene in Terms of Endearment where Deborah Winger is talking to her son and he wants to leave, and she's like, "Listen, I'm about to die. I need to talk to you." Even just talk that. That scene's just gonna always kill me there. But yeah, otherwise, if you've got animals and sad things happen with animals, that's always going to get me. But that scene was really touching, and I was not expecting anything on that level in this movie, and so to have that in there. I think Thunderbolts also had moments like that were really touching, where especially with Yelena Belova when she's comes back to see Bob and they're talking. So I think there's kind of another thread going through here. Some of these Marvel movies where they're working on a different level, kind of where Brand New Day, Anthony Mackie defeats the Red Hulk using empathy. They talk about mental health in the Thunderbolts. In Fantastic Four, it's Sue Storm as kind of like a mama bear thing, protecting her daughter and defeating Galactus with sort of like this mama bear strength that they talk about. Where sometimes they've talked about that. Where a mom will lift a refrigerator or something like that. Just sort of out of nowhere, she'll have that kind of strength, but it's kind of like that thing. And so this movie also has this sort of idea of you don't want to be alone, right? Having other people with you can help you, and sometimes just being that person that reaches out and says, "Hey, I'm here for you," can be important. And so these some of these kind of ideas about ways that they've kind of reconfigured some of the all hope is lost end of the movie kind of deals. I kind of appreciate that. And I appreciate this movie was furthering that. But maybe a good place for us to end this conversation is the message of this movie and how maybe Disney needs to listen to the message of this movie, right? That the idea is you can't do it alone, right? Disney thinks they can do it alone, that they can crush all of their competition, just put their own movies out and everybody's going to love them and watch them. But no, they needed the Odyssey, and the Odyssey needed, Obsession or Michael or whatever, these other movies that came out before, Project Hail Mary. Spider-Man Brand New Day, it needed all of those movies to kind of build it to get to this point where it is selling the kind of, it's making the kind of gate that it's historic at this point. If you just plop this movie down in the middle of the year, if there was no other competition, if Disney was just itself and had crushed all its other competition, so we had no Odyssey this year, we had no Obsession, we had no Project Hail Mary, it was just The Mandalorian and, whatever, I don't know, Devil Wears Prada or whatever, right? This movie doesn't do as well as it does. And I think if Disney can learn that lesson from this, that it needs other movies in the theater to do well for them to do well, I hope that kind of turns a corner for us, when it comes to this consolidated movie industry, and that maybe we can see some more studios kind of come to the surface, and maybe Disney's not so concerned about crushing them and crushing all of its competition. Also, maybe, kind of loosening its stranglehold on the indie theaters and the movies that it's vaulted. If it can see the value in that, I hope. But, who knows? I mean, you're talking about a big multi-billion-dollar corporation like Disney. Expecting them to see the forest for the trees is not always going to happen there. But anyway, why don't we take a break here? You get an ad for Mark and Sales, and when we come back, I will talk about Don's House in the Mountains. My newest book, Mark and Sales, is available now. It follows Mark, who, over the last 10 years, has turned himself into the best possible salesperson he can be. And in that time, he's made his family rich selling cut-rate health insurance to companies that are either looking to save a few bucks or don't know any better. The problem is, he's missed out on the lives of his wife and kids, and the employees of those companies he's sold insurance to now have to deal with higher medical bills and the loss of previously covered providers. As Mark comes to understand the reality of the product he's selling and the toll his long hours at work have taken on his relationship with his family, his company gives him the promotion he's always wanted. Can he now throw away everything he's worked so hard for to make a career change? Mark and Sales takes place in the same world as Chad in Accounting and explores what it means to be an adult in modern society, from family and career obligations to making sense of a changing world as time passes more quickly. You can get an Amazon and Kindle, Kindle Unlimited, and in paperback. The link is in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and we're going to talk about my novel, Don's House in the Mountains. It was my fourth novel. I wrote it during the pandemic, and the basic premise or the story behind this is the main character, Don Veazey. So I named all the last names for the most part in this book. They come from towns around Bangor, Maine. So you got a brewer, I think somebody's named Stetson, Hamden, but Veazey is kind of I don't know if I say a popular one. So Veazey is like it's right between like Bangor and Old Town or Orono, where the University of Maine was. And I remember like my German professor, he was this really funny guy from Hamburg who, he spoke like very fluent English and German, but when he would teach us, he would speak with like no accent, his German with like no accent, which made it like easy for us to understand. But he was a really great guy, and I remember he made this joke. He's like, "What is the point of Veazey? Like, just call it Bangor. Like, why do we need a Veazey?" And that was also a joke when we were at University of Maine. That talk about people go, where did you go away for spring break or something like that, I need a vacation or something, and you would joke, "I want to just go to Veazey," So the other thing I do remember though, there was a Chinese restaurant there called the Oriental Dang, and it was some of the best Chinese food I have ever had. Best, American Chinese food. The place unfortunately didn't last that long, but it was a thing of beauty. So Veazey did have some things, but I just want, that was my idea. So I'm going to name him Don Veazey, and had other characters, again having last names from places around the Bangor area, using Bangor towns and cities to name my characters, and the idea for this character or this story came about when I was thinking about again, coming up with ideas for books that I wanted to write after I was done with Chad and accounting. So this would have been like 2018-ish. And I'd started writing A Girl and a Gun. A Girl and a Gun was originally supposed to be 4 women and a girl and a gun. So the idea was going to be that you'd have the Justin character dating the 4 women that he dates in the early part of the book. And then A Girl and a Gun was going to be a separate story. And then I came with the idea that no, he's actually A Girl and a Gun is going to be a movie that he makes with a rom-com actor after he becomes famous in the second half of A Girl and a Gun, second half of the book. So we have the first part where he's with the different women, the 4 women, and then there's a kind of an interlude, and then you get to him, kind of picking up the pieces after some stuff has happened, and he becomes a famous screenwriter, and he writes this movie, A Girl and a Gun, for this rom-com actor who wants to get out of the rom-com thing. And I'd written a script for it as well for A Girl and a Gun, but when I went to publish the book, it didn't. The formatting didn't look right. So I was trying to think of what other books. Now that I was going to say, okay, this book was going to strictly be about this Justin character, A Girl and a Gun, I had this idea of wanting to do like an author cycle where I would do 3 books based off of authors. So the second one was actually going to be another book with Justin in it, Justin Blackburn, the character from A Girl and a Gun, where he was going to be essentially the Colvin character from Holtman Arms was going to die, and he was going to get his manuscripts and essentially be the person publishing this other person's manuscript. That was the idea that I had for Holtman Arms. And then the third one was going to be called With a Bullet. And the idea with a Bullet was that Justin, that Don Veazey writes a book. He was a writer, and Justin writes a blurb for the book, and it takes off. So that was my third idea for that. So I end up changing Holtman Arms to not having Justin write that book, that I have the main character Colvin Hall exist in that book longer. But I still had that kind of that idea of With a Bullet, that would be, Don's house in the mountains. And I had read The Tempest somewhat around that time, and also Iris Murdoch's The Sea, which is based off The Tempest. So I had this idea of this Don character who suddenly becomes really famous as a writer. That essentially Justin writes the blurb in the book, and then a book blogger that has like millions of YouTube followers reviews the book, and then suddenly everybody buys the book. But that this Don character had written 14 books before this that had like some sales, but nothing crazy. So everyone went and bought the back catalog, and this book publisher that exists in my novels called Cardinal Blueprint. Essentially, it's based off of random. What was Cardinal Blueprint? Is Penguin Random House, right? So Penguin is a different bird, right? Cardinal, and then Blueprint instead of random, because blueprint is a plan. Whereas random is completely unplanned. So that's why it's Cardinal Blueprint. But anyway, so Cardinal Blueprint published, buys up all the rights, and he's worth like 9 figures. But his wife divorces him, or wants a divorce, so he goes and lives in this house in the mountains, and suddenly it just really kind of synced. Like, oh, this is my Tempest, and with the idea of the Tempest, obviously that there's the magical island. I thought, what if I kind of could make it kind of obfuscated that like, is the house really magical, or is it just that Don is so rich that the money creates a sort of magic, right? And in that is like, he had paid somebody ahead of time to stock the house with things. And so he could just find things at any time, that it just happened that whoever stocked the house had put those things there. So things sort of come out of nowhere, but they don't, right? There's almost like, is it magic, or is it just that somebody did a really good job of stocking the house before he moved into it? So you have that element there. And then, of course, there was this idea of like, okay, the estranged wife. And then I had this idea that he would have a daughter as well. And the daughter, Darcy is the name of the daughter, and then the wife is Lois, or the ex-wife, the estranged wife is Lois. And I was trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do with the daughter, Darcy. But the idea is that Don's character, he would have been born in 1970, and the book would take place in 2018. So he'd be 48. So that would be a good age to maybe have a daughter at 28, or when he's 28 in 1998. And my wife at the time had been watching what they call drama channels on YouTube. And there was like this big drama with this guy, Jeffree Star, who does like makeup or something. And then this other guy, I can't think of what his name is. It's but he's like another Shane Dawson. And I don't know if you look, there's a huge controversy where he had done blackface in some of his old videos and all of that. And then these drama channels were talking about him a lot. And then she was showing me some of the other people, like there's like Trisha Paytas and some of the other YouTubers out there. They would do things like eat a lot of food, or they called them mukbangs and stuff like that. So I had this idea that his daughter, because Don is famous, his daughter becomes this famous influencer, and she ends up making all of this money, and that ends up causing some issues because she drops out of college. So you've got this idea of the Tempest, right? You've got the daughter character that would be in there. I was thinking about whether or not I wanted to have the Caliban character. So in the first chapter, which is kind of similar to the Sea, where the first chapter establishes who Don is as like living this solitary life with a dog that he just adopted. And there's a guy who writes UFO stuff that Don used to be friends with when they were kind of making like the low, like kind of the indie writer circuit in Maine. And this guy was like, a UFO writer or whatever. And I had this idea that he would be the Caliban character. But then I was like, no, he can't live with Don. I can't have him living with this guy. So like Don imagines what it would be like to having him live with him, but then just says no. Whereas in the Sea, I think the main character, who's he's a play director, I believe, he does have this guy, a Caliban type character, live with him. Yeah, so I'm kind of mapping out the story and how I want this, Don's life to go. I want his story to go. So I know I've got the daughter, I know I've got the estranged wife, and I hadn't decided yet whether or not he would get back together with the estranged wife at the end. But now I'm at the point where I'm mapping out the chapters. I'm trying to figure out how I want this to go. And so I knew I had this opening chapter that was just going to be establishing who Don is and kind of giving you a sense of what Don's life is, living this solitary life. And I'd come up with some ideas like, how like he adopts the dog and he ends up having a relationship with the woman at the shelter who brings the dog to him. And also, ideas about him like sort of like, what he was doing with his free time now that he was alone. He's playing pool. He was, cooking, making his own meals, and what those kind of meals were. He was trying to learn French, learn to play the clarinet, all these different things that you kind of have. But you find ways to add some tension to that. Like again with the woman who brings the dog. Then there's this whole thing with a moose, and I don't know where I came up with the idea for that, but this idea that a moose walks through his backyard and breaks everything. And I think that was kind of just from my own experience, because again, Don is living in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and so my own experience hiking up there, I was trying to bring things from that, and that was always an unsettling thing if you encountered a moose on the trail, or if you even just saw like moose tracks, because the moose is such a massive animal. You'd think like a bear would be the scariest thing. And obviously I wouldn't want to encounter a bear either. But a moose is just massive. I know one of my friends talked about watching a moose cross the trail in front of him, and just like there were like branches in the way, and he was just snapping the branches with his legs, and he was like big thick branches that he just without even thinking would break them with his leg. And so I kind of was pulling this idea of like what it would be like to have this big massive moose walk through the backyard, but then it's like, oh wait, Don's a famous person, he's a famous writer with a famous Instagram and YouTube following or whatever, famous social media following. So what if he posts this moose on his Instagram? Oh, suddenly it goes viral, right? And now everybody wants to see, or Twitter. I think Twitter was still a thing. It was 2018, so Twitter still would have been a thing. Now everybody's like talking about Don's moose, right? And it was, Don's moose, the hashtag is trending and all of that kind of thing. So it's kind of these things where you kind of just have like a germ of an idea and it builds to something else. So this is 2020 that I'm putting together ideas for this. And of course, we know early 2020, the pandemic starts. And so I had developed what I had in my mind for 3 chapters. Well, I guess 4. I had that early chapter where we establish who he is, a chapter where he hangs out with some of the other authors from my other 2 books that would have come out before this, so Holtman Arms and A Girl and a Gun. So we got that chapter, and then a chapter where he reconnects with his daughter. And I was debating still whether he also reconnected with his wife. That was a part of it, and then maybe like an epilogue style chapter that kind of worked the same way as the early chapter with establishing things. So that's what I had in my head. And I wasn't sure if that would equate to a long enough novel. But around the time the pandemic started, my wife and I watched The Big Chill. And I was like, this actually would be really great for a chapter in the book. It's like, what if his friends from college visit? And, again, it would allow me to add a whole bunch of characters, add a lot of different intrigue. And I was trying to think, okay, well, who is Don out of the the Big Chill characters, right? Because in my head, I would think he'd be Kevin Kline's character because he's like the lead character. But actually, no, he fits better as Tom Berenger, right? Because he's famous. And so that kind of worked out well. Now, I didn't have a Jeff Goldblum character amongst the friends, but all the other ones were represented in there in some way. And, so of course I had a Gretchen character that, similar to, in the movie where you've got the character that, that hooks up with Tom Berenger's character. I kind of, had that similar thing. And then it was a question of like, okay, well, now that he's hooking up with this Gretchen character, what do I do? Do I have him be with her or do I have him be with Lois? And so this Gretchen character kind of, it created tension in the book that I wasn't expecting. This edition of this Big Chill chapter kind of changed the progression of the book. It added characters that I wasn't expecting to add as well. It really changed a lot of what I was doing with the book. And it's one of those things that happens sometimes, that you have an idea of what you want to write, and then inspiration kind of comes out of nowhere. And, again, just watching The Big Chill with my wife and thinking like, oh, let me do a Big Chill style chapter. Now I've got all these characters and I can use them in different ways in the book. It kind of changes things. And so, the William Hurt character, I had him as a character named Nevin. And of course, instead of being a Vietnam vet, right? He's going to be, Afghan war, that kind of thing. But he ended up being a character that kind of lasted throughout the book. And I was surprised, like, how much I was going to use him. And, again, he just sort of comes in there. But then, of course, again, I had this idea of like, okay, what am I going to do as I'm writing this with Gretchen and Lois? Like, who is going to end up with Don? So then, of course, here in the real world, right, in our exact, our existence here, the pandemic had kind of come into full effect, right? This is March. Everything has shut down at this point. And I can't remember if I had put Chad in Accounting out then, or it was like soon after I put Chad in Accounting out. So I finally, it's my first book that I had self-published there. And that was early March. So it was before the pandemic had really kind of taken hold, in the whole country. Obviously, by the end of March, right, we are full on in the pandemic. I mean, I remember my birthday, it was April 1st, and I was talking with one of my friends back in New England saying how, I ordered sushi, got delivered. I mean, that was a point where we were doing DoorDash and everything like that. But everybody was kind of doing these different, like, personal challenges as a way to sort of fill time during this pandemic. And I thought, well, what if I give myself a writing challenge? I'm ready to write this Don's House in the Mountains book. And I had this idea that if I write 4,000 words a day, that by the end of April, I'll have a full novel, right? I mean, 100,000 words is usually what I shoot for my novels. Again, I don't add stuff just to get to 100,000, but that's usually my target. I mean, if it lands at 85, 90,000, that's fine too. But the idea is I want to be somewhere in that range. And so that's the idea, is that by the end of April, I will have a full book. Well, I did do it. I did do 4,000 words a day. The problem was that when I got to April 30th, I wasn't done with the book. So I had 120,000 words at that point. I ended up going an extra 30. It ended up being 150,000. So it's my biggest book at this point. It's my longest one that I've written so far. Again, there's only 5 chapters, which I'm this writing group here in Philadelphia that I attend. One of them was talking about how, short chapters are in. You've got to have short chapters. And I'm like, yeah, I've got... Don's House in the Mountains. It's like roughly 30,000 words per chapter, but actually the first and fifth chapters are short. So it's really those three in the middle are like novella sized, I guess, for what people would consider that. But I did pull it off. Now, of course, then from there it goes through multiple rewrites, and I don't know if I want to tell you what I decided to do in terms of Don's relationships and how that went. I think if you want to read the book, I'd rather you do that. I think if you've read the book already, you know how I went there. But as I'm kind of going through these iterations of reading the book and sort of cutting things out and putting things there, and this is one of the other things I when it comes to doing the rough draft, one of the things I'd read is you just got to get the rough draft on paper. Just get it down, and then you can do everything you need to do to fix it up later. But that's the idea, is just to get it down on the page. And I try to work on that. But one thing I have found is that my brain just kind of works in this idea of, like, I don't like to junk things. I like to kind of work with, like whatever I have on the page almost ends up being what I go with. And so there are times where I have to say, you know what, no, I don't like these 10 pages or so. And so like I'll have like kind of a junk Word file that I'll paste the scraps from whatever book I'm working on into that junk file, that if I ever want it back later, I can. But I do find that I tend to lock in roughly with how I've written it. Now, I do change endings. Like Mark and Sales had a completely different ending when I first wrote it. Then I came up with a different ending and decided to go with that different ending. Don's House in the Mountains, it was kind of one of those ones where I kind of went back and forth, but I think as I was writing it, it just felt like it reached a natural crescendo with, picking one of the two, whether it's Gretchen or Lois. It kind of just wrote itself that way. And so then I had to kind of, work the rest of it from there. But, the Don character, and he was also older than a lot of characters that I write. Usually my characters are kind of roughly my age. And so Don being born in 1970, I had to kind of think things through a little bit on what his life would be like there. And of course he's in a part of Maine that I've never really lived in before. So I had to kind of, understand what that would be as well. Some of the ideas that I came up with, like, for example, that his dad is a lobster fisherman and makes a lot of money as a lobster fisherman, and that his mom's a homemaker. But, that would be enough to send him and his siblings to college at the University of Maine. Those are just some ideas that you just kind of, you're kind of fleshing out who this person is. You just start adding pieces like that there. But yeah, I was trying to think, like, in terms of, with these different story pieces, there's things that sort of, as I'm watching things, or I'm kind of looking at, like, so there's a chapter where he's hanging out with other authors, right? So he's hanging out with Colvin Hall from Holtman Arms. He's hanging out with Trajan Hart, who is this one who I invented in my book Boston Stories, which is going to be coming out soon. He's an author that's kind of like a little bit older than them, but somebody he hangs out with. Elaine Laughlin, who I'm starting to write a book based on her. She's the one who first appears in A Girl and a Gun, but also is in Holtman Arms, and then it appears there. So just hanging out with those people, and there's somehow like this conversation about eating contests and how Don used to do eating contests when he was in college, and so I kind of just went full like man versus food. But then also, I don't know if you remember, if you've ever watched the regular show, they do one that's kind of based off the Last Crusade, right, with the Holy Grail, where Mordecai does an eating challenge that I guess Rigby was allergic to eggs. It was like an excellent omelet challenge where you had to eat this like huge omelet or something like that. And Rigby wanted to do it because he wanted to get the trucker hat, right? That was the big thing. And so then Mordecai, because Rigby's in the hospital because he's allergic to eggs, so Mordecai is like, I'm going to win it for him. I'm going to win this for him. And after he eats the egg, he gets whisked away. He disappears and appears at, essentially at the end of Holy Grail, right? And he's like, you got to there's the Knight Templar there is like, you got to choose wisely. What's the right one? And he remembers Rigby telling him the trucker hat, so he chooses the trucker hat, and he wins. It was the right one, right? He chose the right one. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have Don. None of the Holy Grail stuff in there, but Don and one of his friends goes up like north into Maine, and they do an eating challenge, and he's telling his daughter about it, and she's like, oh, how what it was like, well, I won, I got the hat somewhere, and he goes and digs out this old trucker hat, from the 80s, the late 80s, early 90s, and his daughter's all excited about it and everything. So sort of like those little pieces there, adding into it. But I think the other thing too is I had to. One of the things I think that was interesting about it was writing it in 2018. But then, it came out a few years later writing it in 2020, even though it took place in 2018, and then having it come out in 2023, it allowed me, who's someone who's getting older, to sort of kind of play with the fact that he was getting older, and sort of kind of combine like what that means. I'm essentially roughly how old Don was when he, in the book. And so that was something that as I was writing it and I was, going into my 40s, I could kind of relay some of those things. Now, I've never had any kids, so that was something that I had to sort of kind of draw from. And this was the first character I had written who had kids. Mark and Sales, I wrote that one after. And so that's something that I've kind of had to draw from a lot of sources and try to guess like what a lot of that is like, and sort of use my own experience to say like, what would it be like for me? And add some of that into it. But it was an interesting experience to sort of have that piece in there, and try to make that organic as well when it was something I never experienced before. So I think Don's House on the Mountain is one that it doesn't sell as much as some of the other ones because it is longer and there's a lot more to it. And I think it probably will turn people off if they go into it and say, oh, there's only 5 chapters in this book and it's massive. I do need to put out a 12-point font version of it because I did 10-point fonts with my earlier books. So Nadia and Aiden and Mark and Sales are both 12-point fonts. But when I was first doing all of this, Amazon recommended 10-point fonts for the book. So I was like, all right, I'll do 10-point fonts. That sounds good to me. But now as I'm looking at them, I mean, it seems like you've got a lot to read. You look at the page and it feels like a lot on each page. So I'm going to try to put out 12-point fonts. If I do that with Don's House on the Mountain, it's probably going to be over 400 pages, right? It's going to be a pretty hefty book. So I think that does kind of hurt it a bit. The other thing, though, was so my first 3 books, Holtman Arms, Girl in a Gun, and Chad in Accounting, you may have noticed if you go on my site and you see blog posts from those times, you'll see those old covers. Or if you're somebody who's bought those books, like John Cross, and I think also Rich Hawes also bought one of those. At least he saw them, but there was no image on those covers, right? It was just the title and my name, and then Chad in Accounting was just black with my title and my name. I did, Girl in a Gun is kind of like a purplish title in my name, and then Holtman Arms is green, title in my name. And I was hearing from people like, hey, why don't you have any images? And I like the idea of being really simplistic, but I was also kind of looking at like Philip Roth with his books where there's kind of some simple images on the cover. And so I was playing around with some ideas of what I wanted to maybe do if I wanted to start doing cover images for my books. And I remember I asked a colleague at work, because she did some graphic design, if she could maybe design a cover for Don's House in the Mountains, but it didn't come out the way I wanted it to. And I saw a tutorial on YouTube for using Canva. I was like, okay, well, Canva might be the way to go. And I mean, there's a ton of clip art on Canva that you can use. And so I will say Canva does have AI tools. I did generate an AI cover for Bainbridge, but didn't use it. I was just kind of curious for how the AI tools work. But I was talking with, I think it was John Cross actually when I mentioned it to him, and we were talking about the fact that like the clip art on Canva, at least the artists who create the clip art are compensated in some way. Whereas, with AI, nobody's getting, and it's obviously it's all kind of other bad things. So what I do is I kind of put together pieces of clip art to kind of make the cover. And so I initially designed Don's House in the Mountains with a house. I found a nice clip art house that I really liked, which again, that's what's on the cover there. And then a silhouette of mountains in the background that I thought was perfect. Now, the original cover is actually the color that Nadia and Aiden is, that kind of maroon burgundy type color. And I still have a copy of Don's House in the Mountains in that cover. But I was visiting my family when the proof copy got here to New England, or sorry, to Philadelphia. So I had my wife open it and see what she thought. Jen looked at it and she was like, Don's House in the Mountains, burgundy doesn't really work for Don's House in the Mountains. You should have something brighter. And I said, okay, well, what about like light blue? She's like, yeah, I think that would be perfect. So I got back to got back to Philadelphia from New England, made a cover with the light blue, had that one sent, and yeah, that's the one you get. That's the color that you get. But that was her idea to use the light blue for that. And then I just thought, okay, well, I still like the idea of having that maroon burgundy for one of my covers, so that's why I used that one for Nadia and Aiden. But yeah, Don's House in the Mountains. That was the first time I started designing covers. Then I went back, of course, to Chad in Accounting, Girl in a Gun, and Holtman Arms, and designed covers for those. So Holtman Arms is kind of more in that that Philip Roth cover mode. So if you ever seen some of his novels, a lot of them have just like one image on it or some kind of drawing or something on it. And so Holtman Arms was kind of in that mode. A Girl in a Gun, I got the idea for that cover based off of the fact that the main character is a big fan of Bobby Caldwell. And so I kind of had that one look like Bobby Caldwell's self-titled album, only without the silhouette part of it. You can see that it's not a silhouette of a person. It's a drawing of a person. Again, clip art that I got from Canva. And then Chad in Accounting was the silhouette of a person looking at dollar signs, right? And trying to figure out, because again, that's part of the thing with Chad's character. And again, with Mark and Sales, I sort of took the idea for Chad's and then made Mark and Sales like Chad in Accounting because they're from the same universe. So I wanted to have those covers kind of be similar to each other. So that's the other piece of this, is that when I finally got Don's House in the Mountains ready to go, and again, when I write a rough draft, I usually try to get the novel, the published version out 3 years later. So it's a bunch of rewrites and read-throughs and everything. But yeah, I was like, okay, it's time for me to start having images on my cover. I think they'll sell better that way. And I think, I will say, it didn't work as much for Don's House in the Mountains because I think even having an image on the cover, if the book is big, people will sometimes look at it as a daunting thing and maybe not be so interested. But Nadi and Aiden, I think the cover has really sold that one. I think that one has really helped it, is that design. And again, that was just me kind of thinking about what the book is, and these two characters that are playing instruments to make their way across the country will have the silhouette of the U.S. in the background there. So, I think Don's House in the Mountains, though, I think it's a worthy read. I think, it's a very Gen X story. And again, I'm kind of on the low end cusp of Gen X. I don't exactly consider myself Gen X. And actually, there's a point where Don, who's born in 1970, and then his friend Nevin, who's also the same age as him, and then Trajan was born in 1966. They're talking with Colvin Hall, who was born in 1979, and Colvin considers himself a Gen Xer, and they're essentially telling him, no, you're not a Gen Xer. They're asking him how many Star Wars movies he remembers in the theater. So for me, I look at that. I think that's one true test of a Gen Xer is how many Star Wars movies. Like, for example, my wife remembers 2 of the 3. I only remember Return of the Jedi existing, but I remember like a lunchbox that a neighbor kid that my mom was taking, showing off, seeing off to the bus. He let me use his Empire Strikes Back lunchbox one day. Well, he used my Pigs in Space one. How many times did you vote for Clinton? Well, I wasn't old enough to vote for Clinton either time. I think getting Clinton elected is a big piece of being Gen X. So they talk about these different things and what makes somebody Gen X or not Gen X. And so I hope those conversations are interesting. I think people read them, that there's something in there for them. But this is kind of more Gen X, whereas the other ones, I guess, what's the term, exennial? They're more exennial, I guess, in that sense. Mark and Sales is also kind of more, veers a little bit more Gen X than exennial as well. But they all kind of fit in that vein on some levels. I guess Bainbridge, right? Bainbridge is not, that main character was born in 1950. So that one's, I don't know what that is, Boober, I guess. I don't know if that's what, so yeah, his son Ricky is born in 1980, I think. So he would be the exennial Gen X or whatever. And he's only in his teens in those, or he's like middle school, right, for those books. So I guess that one's really, really boomer, but the rest of them all kind of fit around that age cohort. I think, Chad Accounting, I think he was born in 76, 77, something like that as well. So yeah, kind of fit, it's one of those things they say you should write what you know. And I think to some extent that's true. You should write what you know, but I think also if you can do enough research, sometimes you can, write. You can stretch that a little bit. I think if you write enough, do enough, I think you can maybe make it authentic enough. Step inside somebody else and try to write from their standpoint as well. But anyway, I hope you check out Don's House in the Mountains. The link is going to be in the podcast description. I, again, appreciate any support. And look for it probably in the next month or so. I should be putting out Boston Stories Volume 1. So Boston Stories, it's a collection of flash fiction that I wrote on MySpace in the mid-2000s. I guess it was 2006. While I was finishing 29, which is my first novel that I haven't put out yet. But I was writing that. My friends introduced me to MySpace, and I was like, oh, there's a blog function. I started writing these flash fiction posts about this character who is kind of like the king of Boston, this sort of confirmed bachelor type, but not really confirmed bachelor because he has a girlfriend, but just, sort of kind of rules the city, and then his Norwegian companion Mads, and then this character that was originally the Mayor McCheese, who's become the Baron von Dieter. So they have these goofy vignettes, these sort of like, 500 to 1,000 word vignettes of things that happen to them. And so I'm still editing that, but look for that probably, I would say end of August. I hope I'll have that one ready to go. So keep an eye out, watch this space. And if you again, I always appreciate any support that people have for buying any of my stuff. Yeah, why don't we wrap this up? Because we went an hour and a half here, an hour on Spider-Man and then a half hour on this. So again, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's where you can find links to everything. So definitely, check out the site, see what we got going on there, what reviews we've got lately. Check out the podcast, the main episode. This week, we're going to have Mitch from the Video Vacuum on to talk a little Neil Breen. So keep an eye out for that later this week. And then also, keep an eye out on social media, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook. Try to put announcements, everything. Also on Substack. We are on Substack now, so you can just subscribe to Substack. If you don't want to use social media anymore, subscribe to us on Substack. You'll get an email whenever I post something. So that's might be the easiest way to follow us. And again, if you're trying to kind of do a social media break, I recommend that. Check us out on Substack, subscribe, and you'll get an email every time I post something, so you can keep up with us that way as well. All right, thank you for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.